We're continuing today with a series that we're doing for the month of March, talking about Unity's version of Lent. And we're working with ideas from these two books up here, Keep a True Lent by Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore and The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Reese. I started out last week talking about how our version of Lent and Unity differs a little bit, quite a bit, from the traditional Lent that I learned when I was in Catholic school. 12 years in Catholic school. We were taught that you were supposed to, everybody knows this, you're supposed to fast during Lent, you're supposed to give up stuff that you like. And the way the sisters explained it to me was that we're trying to do something that would get us to identify with the suffering of Jesus. In fact, they used to tell us these stories about these other children. Nobody knew who these children were, but we were assured that there was a child somewhere, probably several of them, who would put sharp stones in their shoes in order to make walking uncomfortable. Didn't make a lot of sense to me, and years later when I was studying Buddhism, I found out why. Because the highest goal of the Buddhist spiritual practice is liberation from suffering. Not to cause more suffering, but to be liberated from it. And then, of course, not long after that, I learned about how Unity regards Lent. So this is from the foreword to Fillmore's book, Keep a True Lent. Each one of us must be concerned with improving his own life. We must learn to deny our selfish impulses and be obedient to impulses of brotherly love. When we withdraw our attention, interest, and support from the false and the unworthy, that is true fasting. When we give that same attention, interest, and support to the enduring good, we are feasting on the things of the Spirit, and this is true prayer. Withdrawing our attention from the false and unworthy and focusing on the true, the good, and the beautiful. Fasting from negative thinking. Putting something positive and life-affirming in its place. You know, Lent is only about 46 days long, which isn't nearly long enough to explore all of the different ways that there are to help us to deal with habitual forms of negative thinking. Actually, those are things that we should be doing all year round, and we do visit those topics over and over again. It's what we do here, and it's always a good time to take a period like Lent to set it aside and to renew our intention, to sharpen our focus on this kind of spiritual practice. Lent is a great opportunity for that. So today we're going to look at words. Our language, which is one of the best indicators of what is going on in consciousness. Right? Talk is not cheap. We hear that. Talk is cheap. Talk is not cheap because our words contain the content of our thoughts. They reflect what's going on in consciousness. So the words we use are a really good starting point for practicing this thing we call self-awareness. Learning how to see our habitual limited thinking and maybe replace it with something better. And words, let's face it, words are interesting. Words are fascinating. You know, they say there are something like 846,627 words in the English language, give or take a handful. I don't know how they come up with this stuff, but that is a lot of words. I can't imagine we would need to know more than a few thousand, but there it is. And of course, that's just the English language. There are something like 7,300 other languages and dialects around the world. Lots of words floating around out there. And I really admire people who are bilingual. And I'm talking about people who can actually think and speak in other languages. Okay? Knowing a few swear words doesn't count. And what is it about that? Why is it that just about everybody can cuss in another language? There was a funny scene in a movie about that anyway. Language is a funny thing. For instance, think about a boxing ring. A boxing ring is square. First time I saw an eggplant, I said, "Where's the egg?" No ham in hamburger. A pineapple contains neither pine nor apples. Sweetmeats are candy, while sweet breads, which aren't sweet, are meat. Why is it that writers write, but fingers don't fing? Grocers don't gross. Hammers don't ham. Consider this. If the plural of tooth is teeth, why isn't the plural of booth beef? One goose, two geese. So it stands to reason that if one moose is a moose, then two should be meese, right? Now this one hits a little closer to home because they say that a teacher taught something. A teacher taught. So why don't preachers prot? And if vegetarians eat vegetables, tell me what a humanitarian eats. You recite at a play, and you play at a recital. In our language, you can have a nose that runs and feet that smell. Think about that. And how can a slim chance and a fat chance be the same thing, while a wise man and a wise guy are opposites? I have to give credit where credit is due. I didn't string that all together myself. Richard Lederer, author of Fractured English, wrote another book called Crazy English, where he has all sorts of stuff like this. Masterfully done. So words can indeed be entertaining. They're fun. They can make us laugh. They can make us cry. I heard a few of you groaning. Words can paint pictures. Poetry and literature can evoke the entire range of human emotions, from anger to compassion, joy and sorrow. You could create an entire universe out of words. Between the front and back cover of a book, an entire universe. Words are powerful things. You've heard the old saying that the pen is mightier than the sword. It's also a lot easier to write with. Consider the book of Genesis. Regardless of what you think about the Bible, it is an ancient story. A creation myth where God literally speaks the universe into existence and then follows it up with an affirmation. Calls it good. Speaks it into existence, calls it good. And then we go from Genesis to the fourth gospel, John, which begins with its own version of the creation story. You might remember these words. First verse of John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being." Sort of an echoing of the Genesis story here. And I've mentioned this before, but it's an important concept because John was written in Greek. The Greek word for word is logos, which has a very rich meaning in Greek philosophy. It doesn't just mean word. It also means the principle of order that is behind the word, and also knowledge. So you could call it the principle of order and knowledge. So if we were to take that first verse in John and rework it with that understanding of what they mean by word, it might sound something like this. In the beginning was a principle of order and knowledge by which all things have come into being. And we call that principle of order and knowledge God. It takes on a whole different meaning. It starts to come a little more alive when we hear it like that. But we have to go beyond the surface and get at the deeper meaning of these words. So in the language of Genesis, we want to use our words in such a way that whatever we create with them can be called good. Because it can go both ways. It can go both ways. In the four agreements, the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. And the author says that the word is like a sword with two edges. He says one edge is the misuse of the word, which creates a living hell. The other edge is the impeccability of the word, which will only create beauty, love, and heaven on earth. So that's part of what we're up to in this practice. And to get it from a Fillmore perspective, in his book Dynamics for Living, Charles Fillmore said, "Every word has its effect, though unseen and unrecognized. What we think, we usually express in words. Our words bring about in our life and affairs whatever we put into them. A weak thought is followed by words of weakness. And through the law of expression and form, words of weakness change to weakness the character of everything that receives them. That's a pretty extreme statement, but that's what Charles thought about this process of thinking and speaking and how important it really is. A negative thought is followed by negative words, right? And through the law of expression and form, negative words are going to create more negative experiences for those who are around us. And out it goes. So we want to be able to offer words that are life-affirming and positive whenever possible. It was during our fall series last year, we were working with this book called Resilient, which dealt with a lot of principles that come to us from Buddhism, and we learned about a number of different ways to evaluate our words, which we could reduce to just these 3 questions, which I know you've heard before, but they're worth reviewing. If we want to make sure that our words are creating beauty and order instead of misery and chaos, we ask 3 questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? The first one, is it true? Well, that's kind of an easy one. It means that I will not present anything as true that I know is false. But is it really that easy? Is that where it stops? Is it enough to refrain from telling outright lies? What about when I assert my opinion or my preference as a fact? What about recirculating stuff on Facebook? Oh my. Or emails, those chain emails. What about recirculating emails and stuff on Facebook without at least checking it out on Snopes to see whether it's been thoroughly fact-checked and vetted? And even if something is true and necessary, what tone do we take? Is it kind? If I go into a restaurant and I order a steak, I want it medium well and it arrives raw in the middle, it's perfectly okay to send it back. But I don't have to call the chef a careless buffoon. There's a way to communicate without letting those kind of things take over the conversation. And on the other hand, something can be true and packaged with kindness, but does the world really need to hear what we have to say? You know, I said earlier that talk isn't cheap. Words are powerful. And the reason that people say talk is cheap comes down to something I mentioned before. It's basic economics, right? In economics, the price of something goes down, the value goes down, it becomes cheap when supply exceeds demand. So, stop it. Stop it. There it is. Talk becomes cheap whenever the supply exceeds the demand. There you go. Talk is only cheap when the supply exceeds the demand. You know, we live in a world where everyone thinks that they're entitled to tell everyone else what they think, where we get this idea that everyone needs to hear what we have to say. If you read the news online, or if you're accustomed to going on Facebook, You've probably noticed that most stories and most Facebook posts allow people to post comments. I'm going to share a very valuable piece of advice that will lead to greater peace of mind and serenity. And it is this: never, ever read the comments. In fact, if you want to give something up for Lent, stop reading the comments section. Your life will go much better. You know, another thing that's never necessary is gossip and a form of complaining. Actually, 2 things that are never necessary are gossip and a form of complaining that I call kvetching. Don't you just love the sound of Yiddish words? You know, they have a quality to them that you don't even have to know what they mean, but you get a pretty good idea. Like if somebody tells you there's a schmutz in your water glass, you know that's not a good thing, right? Schmutz means a piece of dirt, so schmutz in your water glass. Kvetch, kvetching. You call someone a kvetch, you can be pretty sure that that's not a compliment, right? A kvetch is a chronic whiner and complainer. They're not trying to change something for the better. They just like to complain, and nobody likes a kvetch. Wonderful word. As Maya Angelou once said, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, then change your attitude. Don't kvetch. Don't complain is what she said, but when she talks about complaining, we're talking about kvetching there, because it's okay to complain, right? It's okay to tell the chef, this steak is not the way I ordered it. Some people will call that a complaint. It's okay. Kvetching is not. Okay, one final thought. Being impeccable with our word doesn't equal stuffing our feelings. It's about becoming more aware of the feelings, so much so that we can see the negative thought and the feeling before they come out in the form of those words or actions that go on to create negative experiences for people. You know, we all get frustrated. We all get irritated and fed up, and so if you need to, if you want to engage in a righteous rant, write it down in a journal. Talk to a therapist. Talk to a minister. And even though bartenders, barbers, and hairdressers are used to hearing a lot of gossiping and kvetching, that doesn't count, all right? Complaining to a bartender is gossip and kvetching. So, another thing is not to expect to get it perfect right away. It's part of the human condition. We've been trained to be less than impeccable with our words. To quote the great rock and roll sage, here he is, Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh, he sang, I can't complain, but sometimes I still do. Life's been good to me so far. So, maybe based on that, a shorthand version of how to be impeccable with our words is to simply affirm that basically life is good. And what more can I say about that other than to show you this picture of our golden retriever who says that life is good. She would agree 100% that life is good. All she needs is a ball, grass to roll in, and she's about to get her tummy rubbed right there. So that is in picture form, life is good. All right, that's all for the first agreement. Next week we will move on and we'll talk about how to not take things personally. Come on back. All right, thank you.